All right. Well, if you brought a Bible with you, open up to Genesis 27, where we're going to be today, and feel free to follow along on the sermon outline as well. If that helps you, kids on the back, there's a word catch there. You can help you follow along as well. Well, I got some bad news for you. In today's passage, there are no heroes, there are no models, there are no good guys. Some people come to the Bible expecting that every story will have someone for them to emulate, someone they should be like, someone who they should aspire to be. In fact, some people read the Bible and this really concerns them because they read some stories and they say, oh, am I supposed to be like that? Well, this is a misunderstanding of what the Bible is. It's not a series of morality tales for us, but it's an unfolding of the plan of redemption of God through the ages. And so we're going through Genesis this year as a church in large parts so that we understand better God's plan of salvation and how God established his people. So each week we're taking a little bit of Genesis. This week we'll cover, Lord willing, all of chapter 27. And in this chapter you're going to see four major figures: Isaac and Rebekah, a married couple who are the mom and dad, and then Jacob and Esau, twin brothers who are adults. And out of those four figures, all of them will come off poorly. In your own Bible, you'll see that, and I hope that comes across. Isaac, Rebekah, they don't come off as great parents. They don't come off as full of faith. Jacob and Esau are brothers at each other's throats. All of them, all four of them, are conniving, selfish, self-centered, and lacking in faith. And these are the biblical heroes that we turn to today. So we're going to look at it in five couplets. That each passage in this scene is a scene between two people interacting. So we'll talk about five of those couplets today. And the first one is missing from your sermon outline because someone made a mistake. And that was me that made a mistake. And we're talking about Isaac and Esau's interaction here in verse 1. So Genesis 27, verse 1. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." And he said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death." All right, so let me do a little unlearning here for a second. You read that and you think, oh, poor guy. He's on his deathbed. All right, read the rest of Genesis. He lives 44 more years after this. 44 more years, right? So he is not on his deathbed. He is anything but on his deathbed at this moment. So I just want to point that out on the beginning. Because if you read the story and you think, Isaac just needs he just wants to have an In-N-Out burger before he dies, what's so wrong about that? You're going to miss the point of what the Bible's actually affirming here. What's happening is Isaac wants to use our idiom, get his affairs in order, establish his will and his trust. That's fine. That's good. We shall have our affairs in order. We're all going to die one day. But for Isaac, that means I want to make sure that Esau, my favored son, gets the blessing, and not Jacob, my less favored son. And if that sounds like bad parenting, ding, 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 you're on the right path here. In fact, the reason he's trying to make sure this happens in case he dies is because of a couple things we've seen already in Genesis. First off, when in chapter 25, when Jacob and Esau were in the womb, Rebekah, his wife, had heard a prophecy from God that Jacob would be the blessed one instead of Esau. And then fast forward a few years, and when Esau had become a man, he had disdained the blessing of God and sold off his birthright for a bowl of soup. So God has said it's not going to be Esau. Esau has said it's not going to be Esau. And Isaac says, but it's going to be Esau, right? This is Esau's heavy-handedness, this is his lack of faith, and this is his self-centeredness coming to bear. But then this weird thing happens. Instead of just blessing Esau, he gets food involved. And I don't know why he does this. I don't know why he doesn't just say, Esau, I've resolved to bless you. I mean, you can read the blessing. It's later on in the chapter. It only takes 10 seconds. I will just bless you. Like, why this middle part? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Verse 3. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out into the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Now, it's possible the food is there for ceremonial reasons. It's possible the food is there as sort of a challenge or a quest for Esau. That's all possible. But when you read the rest of Genesis, you realize that there's actually a line about this in chapter 26. Isaac preferred Esau because of the food that he brought him. That is why Isaac likes Esau, because of Isaac's own selfish and physical desires. And now he is grounding the blessing of Esau based on what Esau can do for him. And so he says, Esau, you know how I've always liked you better than your brother because of the food you give me? And Esau goes, yeah, give me some more food and then I'll give you the blessing. Again, if this sounds like terrible parenting, that's kind of the point of the early part of the chapter. We learn, so first warning of the passage, if we want to just be really literal about it, don't parent like Isaac. This is not a good model for us. But Esau's instructions are overheard. Tent walls are thin and Rebekah's listening. And Rebekah in verses 5 to 7 turns to Jacob and tells her what she's heard her husband say and decides that she's going to intervene. In fact, you see the split that has happened in their family in verses 5 and 6, because Esau is referred to as Isaac's son, and in verse 6, Jacob is referred to as Rebekah's son. And you think, hold on, aren't they married? Aren't these boys twins, or these men at this point twins? Yes, but in a very probably painfully familiar sight to many families, this family has cleaved itself in two. And Rebekah and Jacob have taken one side of the aisle, and Isaac and Esau have taken the other side of the aisle. And so rather than being a united front, Rebekah and Isaac, now it has become Rebekah and Jacob, and Isaac and Esau on the other side. And so rather than doing what a married couple should do, which is Isaac and Rebekah working this out directly as parents, Rebekah is conniving and backhanded and tries to undercut her husband, even as he's left her out of this decision altogether. So in verse 8, she says, now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock, bring me 2 young goats, that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you will bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. This is a crazy plan, right? Let's just admit the sort of comedic part of this. She's going to have her son bless her husband into tricking him, rather than just talking about this in family therapy or something. What kind of dysfunctional family is this? The parents are dysfunctional in the husband and wife relationship. The father, Isaac, is dysfunctional to the son Esau. The mother, Rebekah, is dysfunctional with the son Jacob. Jacob and Esau, we'll see later, have a very dysfunctional relationship. But at the core of this dysfunction is an object that they all desire. What's that thing that this is all fighting over? What is this whole conflict rooted in? They want the blessing. So this raises a very obvious question, like, what is the blessing? What is this thing that they're chasing after? Well, we'll read about it directly in verses 27 to 28 in a little bit, 27 to 29. It establishes the recipient as the leader of the family and gives them benefits in a variety of ways. But it doesn't explain why Jacob is able to trick his way into grabbing it. You see pretty quickly in this passage that they're talking about the blessing as if it's something almost physical that you can hold on to. Now, we tend to think of blessing as, oh, their memory was a blessing, and we root it in our own emotion, our own mind, our own heart, or our feelings. Like when we experience something, that was a blessing to me. But they're talking about a blessing as if it's a concrete thing that could be held on to. So there's clearly more about this blessing than meets the eye. Really, if I were to summarize it, I'd say what both of them want, what everyone in this story wants, is for the decree that God is for them and that their father is for them. And Jacob desperately wants to steal this blessing, but he sees his mother's plan as flawed. He basically says, Mom, I don't know if you noticed, but Esau and I don't really look alike. We don't really act alike. Even though we're twins, we're apparently not identical twins. He is so hairy that you don't know where his chest hair stops and his back hair begins. Like, we don't... Some of you feel like victimized by that statement. I'm sorry. And he's concerned, what if I'm caught? What if Dad notices this? And his mom responds with an ominous offer. Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice. I say it's ominous because by the end of the story, Rebekah really will be cursed. So she provokes Jacob to steal the blessing. They slaughter the goats and use the meat to make Isaac his meal. and they use the skins to mimic the hairiness of Esau. And once Isaac is dressed up with goat hair on his hands and his neck, and he's holding the meal in his hands, he's ready to go in and meet his father. And let's pause here for a moment to play the elimination game. Who's the good guy? This is the game. Isaac has used the promise of God's blessing in order to satisfy his stomach and his pride, so he's out. Esau's already shown us in chapter 25 he doesn't care about God's blessing in his life, and he's treated it with disdain, so he's out. Rebekah is desperately trying to deceive and connive against her husband, so she's out as a good guy in the story. And Jacob is currently covered in goat hair. So, you guys know the story Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? Yeah, okay, enthusiasm up front, yeah. So the central premise of the story of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is all the kids come to figure out who is the one who truly deserves to inherit the chocolate factory. And one by one, the kids are kind of eliminated based on their vices or based on their failures. And then in the end, Charlie is considered the noble one, so he inherits the chocolate factory. And there's Oompa Loompas for some reason. What if at the end of that story, the answer is just no one? No one deserves to inherit the chocolate factory. Because that's what's happening in this story. No one deserves the blessing. Not Jacob, not Esau, neither of them. So what do we do with that? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go on in the story. And notice as Jacob goes in the third scene here, to interact with his father Isaac, how many of the 10 commandments he breaks. Verse 18. So Jacob went into his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." This is, if we had a video feed of this scene, it'd be a funny scene, right? Jacob is standing up in front of his father, covered with goat skins on, trying to pretend to be someone he's not. And if you wanted to sort of play this as a comedy, you could kind of play it for laughs and think about, it's so funny that he's dressed up as somebody else, pretending to be somebody else. But when you think about it emotionally, I can't help but wonder how sad it is. Think about how sad it is to have a son standing in front of his father, lying to him about who he is, trying to be his brother just to win his father's blessing. Not just lying to him, but deceiving him about his very identity, and just say, if I could pretend to be Esau, then maybe you'll bless me. Maybe you'll approve of me. Maybe you'll like me. Maybe you'll give me the very thing that I've never gotten from you. I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to see this parallel in our lives today. How many of us and how often have we put on ridiculous pretensions and falsities in order to gain the approval of others? It might not be goat skins, but it might as well be. We act like we're someone else to get people to bless us because we're so desperate to grab the approval that comes off of their lips. And like Jacob, we stand there pretending, hiding, lying, hoping that we'll win the approval of Isaac. Of course, this doesn't work, right? The hole gets deep really fast. Isaac says to his son, "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" And he answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Oh, if you are scoring at home on the 10 commandments that he is breaking, we have taking the Lord's name in vain, we have lying, we have stealing, we have dishonoring your father, we have coveting. I just hope he didn't do it on a Saturday. He's really working his way through this list. Why do I point this out? To show the sinfulness of Jacob's actions. One of the ways we get this passage wrong is we could get to the end of it, we could say, well, I don't approve of what Jacob did, but in the end, I don't know, he got the blessing, so I guess the ends justify the means. That's not the point of this passage. The point of the passage is actually kind of the opposite. It's that Jacob, in spite of his sin, is blessed by God, not because of it. Isaac has his own list that he's working through, though. It's not the 10 commandments, but it's the list of his senses. It's his physical senses, his capacity to eat and hear and see. He no longer is being driven by God's direction, right? He's blinded himself spiritually, and he's also blind now physically. He's left that behind when he's decided that he's going to bless Esau no matter what. And so he's groping around in the dark for what to do spiritually, and he's physically groping around in the dark trying to figure out what to do next. He's driven by his stomach, by that sense. And now in the next few verses, he'll decide what to do based on feel and smell and hearing. So in verse 21, Isaac says to Jacob, "Please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you're really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because the hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. And so he blessed him. And he said, "Are you really my son Esau?" And he answered him, "I am." And then he said, "Bring it near to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it near to him and he ate. And he brought him wine and he drank. And then this is maybe the saddest couple verses in the passage. His father Isaac said to him, whose father? Jacob's father. His father said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments. Whose garments? Esau's garments. And blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed." Can you imagine the emotions going through Jacob right now? To kiss your father, pretending to be your brother, only for him to smell your brother's clothes and say, "Ah, the son that I love." Oh my gosh. I don't have a brother, but I could imagine this. I could put myself in his shoes and say, how tragic. To get the blessing, the approval of his father, he couldn't be himself. This is what makes the story of Jacob so important for us today. Because Jacob's pretending has been mimicked by people for thousands of years. We've hid our sin. We pretended to be someone we're not to get the approval of other people. And some of us continue to do it to try to get the approval of God. So what was that blessing that Isaac bestowed? In this blessing, Isaac declares that Jacob will be the leader of his family, the head of the line of kings, and the center of God's work in the world. He says in verse 28, "May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. And cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." This blessing, only a couple verses, but it'll be history changing. These things will come to pass. Jacob's sons will become the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And it's out of that lineage that his son Judah, Jacob's son Judah, would be the line of the kings, King David and all those who would come after him, ultimately leading to Jesus Christ. This blessing really matters, and Jacob grabs it under falsehood. And what's inevitable about the story, it happens quickly. Esau shows up. He has no idea what's been going on. This brings us to our fourth scene, because as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, this is in verse 30, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from hunting. Esau brings in the food. He's ready for the blessing, only to be shocked at what's happened while he's gone. Isaac's confused in verse 32 and says, "Who are you?" And he answers, "I am your son, your firstborn son, Esau." And then Isaac trembled very violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it before you came and have blessed him." And then this interesting repetition, "Yes, and he shall be blessed." How do you read Isaac's words here? What do you think is happening? Why can't Isaac take it back? I mean, let's be honest. If this happened in your family and your sister pretended to be you at the will reading and said, "No, I'm Sarah, not her," and then you're like, no, it's me. It would just get worked out, right? It wouldn't get, the next 30 years, they wouldn't get to be CEO of the company. Like, why is this so irreversible? Some people think it's irreversible because it's sort of magical thinking or sort of wizardry thinking. Like, once Isaac said the magic words, he can't take them back, as if it's some sort of Disney movie. Well, I suppose that's possible. I think the better reading, though, is that Isaac, in this moment where he says, "Yes, and he shall be blessed," realizes that he has been trying to go against God the whole time. That Isaac realizes that he has been kicking against God's plan throughout this entire process. And when he realizes that in his own words, he has said about the very thing God decreed, there's this moment of clarity for him. In the New Testament, in Romans 9, it says that God established that Jacob would be the blessed one instead of Esau. That this is not an accident or a conniving, even though that's a human level, but on a God level, this has always been decreed and deciding. Esau, probably understandably wounded, says in verse 34, when he hears the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing." Now, if this is the only chapter of Genesis you've read, or the only part of Genesis you've read, you're probably thinking at this point, I don't know, Bob, you're kind of being hard on Esau. He just seems like a victim here. This doesn't seem like he really did anything wrong. He was asked to go do some hunting. He did some hunting. He cooked some food, and all of a sudden, everything got pulled out from under him. Why is Esau the bad guy? Well, I want to just sort of take your mind back to chapter 25 that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And in that time, Esau showed really clearly he couldn't give two rips about God's blessing in his life. He didn't want the birthright. He didn't want God's rule or reign in his life. He didn't want to be part of that. He traded it all for a bowl of soup. Esau voluntarily gave it away, and now Jacob steals it from him. So which one was more important? Both of them. And both of them show us two aspects of sin. Esau and Jacob are both sinners like us, and Esau treats something sacred disdainfully, and Jacob treats something sacred profanely. But in both ways, they represent how we sin today. Esau's angry, and in verse 36 he says, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright." Talk about blame shifting. "And behold, now he has taken away my blessing." And then he said, "Have you not received a blessing for me?" That's an interesting question, isn't it? Have you not reserved a blessing for me? Now, Isaac thought he was giving all the blessing to Esau. I don't think Esau would have cared about this if the roles had been reversed. But now that he's on the outside looking in, he says, hey, Dad, you wouldn't just give all the blessing to one child, right? That's terrible parenting. Wouldn't you divide it evenly between your kids? Or wouldn't you consider carefully the differences between your kids and give them both what is good? You wouldn't be so foolish as to just treat one child with preference over the other. That'd be terrible parenting, Dad. And Isaac answers in verse 37 and says to Esau, "Behold, I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants. And with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?" And Esau said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Oh, this is one of the great foreshadowing moments of this passage from the Old Testament. Have you but one blessing, O my father? Isaac, are you so limited in who you can bless that you can only bless one of us? Wouldn't it be great if there was a father who could bless the world? We'll come back to that in a little bit. Isaac proceeds to make a statement now towards Esau. I can't really call it a blessing because God's not really involved. He just kind of says some stuff that's going to come to pass in Esau's life. He says in verse 39, "Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, away from the dew of heaven on high." If you're sort of carefully following along, you might remember Jacob gets the blessing to be where the fatness of the earth is, and where the dew is. That's sort of poetic ways to talk about prosperity. Esau's away from it. "By your sword you shall live, you shall serve your brother." Right? Esau has a subservient soldier role, whereas Jacob has been decreed as the king. But, and this is the only silver lining, "when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." It was kind of the only thing sort of held out for him. So what's the point of this chapter? What do we do with this? The end of the chapter I think is really important in determining that. Because if we stopped here, you'd say, well, I don't know. I guess God likes tricksters? I don't know. God likes people who deceive their parents? That seems weird. That doesn't seem right. Or maybe you'd go the other way and say, sometimes God gets his hands tied by people who pretend to be other people? That seems weird. That doesn't seem like good theology either. That's why verses 41 to 45 are really important. Esau and Jacob's sort of breaking up of their family. Esau resolves to kill his brother. He's so angry with him. And as a result, Jacob has to flee to get away from Esau. And he'll spend the next 20 years of his life, Jacob will, in servitude, being tricked himself by his uncle. And Rebekah, for her part, will never see her beloved son Jacob again in her life. The results of this section show us this deception is not really something to delight in, but something to grieve. And I think it sort of leaves us at the end of the chapter wondering, does it have to be this way? Does it have to be this way? It kind of leaves us with a riddle. How are we going to distribute the privileges of the firstborn to his siblings? You know, if Jacob tries to grab it and steal it, chaos ensues. But if Esau just receives the blessings, then none of his siblings get anything. So what's the answer? Well, there'd have to be a firstborn son who would freely share all he has with his siblings. He'd have to give it, not because he didn't care about it, but because of love. And the father couldn't be duped or tricked into it, but the father would have to willingly have his son do this. Now, if this starts to sound like the gospel of Jesus, I hope you hear the echoes here in the Old Testament, because this is the story of the gospel. Jesus is the only begotten Son of the Father. He has every claim to God's power, authority, and blessing. And we have infinitely less right than Jacob does to ever think we could steal anything away from him. And yet, Jesus doesn't have his firstborn blessing stolen. He gives it away freely. He freely invites us to enjoy the blessing of being sons of the Father of God. In fact, he doesn't just invite us to be part of it, he makes it possible for us to be a part of it. That's what it means that you and I are declared co-heirs with Christ and children of God. This story is a warning about bad parenting. Yes, there's a moral aspect to this story. Don't be parents like Isaac and Rebekah. But much more than that, it's a inversion of the story of the gospel. It's the opposite of the gospel. This is what happens when oldest sons connive and scheme against one another and treat the blessing of God with disdain. But what would happen if there was an oldest son who freely gave up his privileges for the sake of bringing other people into the blessing of God? Jacob dresses up as Esau to hear the blessing of the father, a blessing that's based on a lie. Well, doesn't that remind you of something? Jesus dresses up as us. And while he does hear the true blessing of the Father, he also takes on the wrath of the Father for us on the cross. So, what do we do with this sermon? We apply it morally, right? Have a better marriage than Isaac and Rebekah. Don't line up against your kids. Be better parents. Don't pit them against each other. Don't make decisions out of rivalry and selfishness. All that is true. That's the moral part. Secondly, it also invites us to self-reflection. If you have found yourself wearing goat hair like Jacob and saying, how did I get myself in this point? Maybe like Jacob, you're pretending to be someone you're not, to try to grab the words of blessing that are meant for somebody else. So what blessing are you chasing? And who are you willing to pretend to be to get it? And what does it tell you about what you really long for from the Word of God? And then maybe the most important thing to me about this sermon that you get out of it is that Jesus really is the better Jacob and Esau. He came not to pretend to be someone he's not, but to be fully human and fully God at the same time. He came not to steal blessing, but to give blessing. And he came not to, he doesn't destroy a family, but, and I love this, he establishes the family of God. And he invites us to participate in that with him as a result of what he's done for us on the cross. We're going to celebrate that when we take communion here in a few minutes. But first, let's pray. God, I pray for my friends who are here, who, as they hear the story, it rings a very painful chord in their life experience because it reminds them of ways that maybe their family functioned or dysfunctioned in how they were treated or how they treated one another. And they see the ways that they have been chasing their, maybe their parents' approval or their siblings' approval, or they've been at odds with people, and this rings a deep chord for them in their soul. God, I pray that as we hear the words of blessing that come from your lips, it would be the most important thing that anyone ever says about us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.